I'm very excited to have Pranav here, who is a year 4 UQMD student. So about, I guess, halfway through the year or nearing it. And Pranav is currently doing an ophthalmology rotation in Toronto, having come from Ottawa as well. And so maybe I will start turning it over to you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you brought you to study here, how you chose UQ, and sort of tell us about your journey to get where you are.
All right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jamie. Hi everyone. My name is Pranav. If you attend more of these sessions, you'll probably see me quite a bit, or if you do choose to attend UQ. So I'm in my fourth year, and so I grew up in Mississauga. I did my undergraduate education at the University of Calgary, but I did a Bachelor's of Health Science. And then after graduating, I graduated in 2021. I decided to apply for medical school. And so one of my friends, because for those who've been to Calgary and Banff, there's a lot of Australians there, particularly those who come up to ski. And so a lot of my friends and my sister's friends were Australians. They were like, you got to go to Australia. And so I started looking at potential for applying to medical school admissions, and I found Austrek there. And I sort of looked at all the universities and sort of applied, and I did interviews, and I got in. And at the end of the day, I ended up choosing UQ. One, because real estate in Brisbane is slightly cheaper than Sydney and Melbourne, but also because they had a lot of opportunities as sort of as an international student to do stuff like I'm doing currently now here in Ontario, as well as particularly during COVID, it was pretty dicey whether the borders are open or not, and UQ offered just extra flexibility the other schools didn't. So that's how I sort of got here. I did sort of similar thing. So first 2 years were more classroom focused, and then my last 2 years I've been on placements pretty much full time. And so I've done all the major ones you can think of: pediatrics, obstetrics and gynecology, psychiatry, surgery, internal medicine. I've done my rural Australian placement. I've done GP, and now I'm doing ophthalmology as my elective. And so lots of really cool opportunities. And so that's a quick gist of what's brought me here.
What was the process of you to choose your away rotation specifically? And how did you go about securing these two or these rotations, coming back to Canada, that whole process? What did it look like for you?
Yeah, so the main thing you'll notice if you choose to go into med school, pretty much whatever you go to, your last year is about 50% medicine and 50% paperwork and logistics. And so, particularly if you're choosing to apply, for me, in our case, abroad back home to Canada, there's a lot of things to consider. There's two licensing exams, there's your reference letters, there's what field you want to do, where you want to do it. And then depending on certain provinces, you have to interview for those provinces to get the right to apply to those provinces later on. There's a lot of different steps involved. For me, the main thing is the licensing exam. So there's a multiple choices exam, which is offered at 3 different periods throughout the year. You could even take it in Australia. However, the in-person exam, which is the NACOSCI, or essentially the North American Assessment OSCE, I think it stands for, is really offered on 2 weekends a year. And so one of those weekends is May 3rd, which is when I wrote it, and the other weekend is in September. And so generally speaking, we got to sort of preference when our elective block was, I preferenced it for this period of time because I knew I had to write the exam. And so it'd be nice if I could both do my coursework and write the licensing exam at the same time. And UQ had a process where you could say that, hey, I really need this year, so I don't have to fly and miss some other period of school in Australia to come do an exam for a weekend and fly back. And so that was sort of the idea of sort of choosing the timeline. Application-wise, Canada is pretty simple. There's one portal that all the Canadian students also apply to. It's called the AFMC portal. And then as an international, you apply to the same thing. Essentially, Canadian students get dibs 2 weeks before you do for any electives. And there's certain caveats to different regions, like Saskatchewan, you need to have a Saskatchewan health card, et cetera, et cetera. Quebec or McGill, you need to be fluent in French. And so there's a few caveats there, province dependent on where you want to apply. But I and they have like a lot of different deadlines. So the application opened up, I applied, you pay the fee, you submit all the requirements, and generally speaking, as long as it's available, they'll give it to you. And so for me, I knew I wanted to ophthalmology. It's not offered in many schools at all anywhere in the world. And the two big centers in Canada for it are Toronto and Ottawa. And so I applied to those places. They took me, and here I am.
In addition to sort of making adjustments or accommodations, I guess, to allow you to come back when you're taking the NAC OSCE, What other supports are available to you as a Canadian interested in the match, whether it's prepping for the exam or studying with other students, strategizing? I don't know. Are there kind of student focused or university led supports at all?
Yeah, so there's a couple from each level. And so from the UQ level through the International Committee, and as you see, the question is very similar to the US, same thing, they just have their own portal. But yeah, in terms of sort of sports from the UQ level, you can sort of like register your interest to match. And if you say like, hey, I'm trying to match, I need to let these exams, they provide resources like a free question bank and sort of prep materials for the exams. From the student side, there's sort of Zoom presentations and workshops held for, how to apply, because the guidelines change every year, what's available, tips and strategies for like when the deadlines are, how to line it up, especially for a few students who are doing US, Canada, and Australia. So there's a lot of chaos. May is a really bad month because it's a lot of applications at the same time. And then from our more like national student level, like the Australian Medical Students Association does workshops and webinars for applying to Canada or the US. And then UQ in general, I did that because there's a lot of Canadians. I think there's about 50 in my year. And so the 50 of us, I think 20 of us wrote it in May. And so when I was in Toronto, 8 other medical students were with me writing the exam. And so we all studied together, like we had GP together. I was lucky in that the rural student I was with was also Canadian. So we do our shift at the hospital, do our at the GP clinic, and then just practice throughout the night. And so some for sort of all levels, there's a lot of students writing it with you. So there's a lot of student support. There's a lot of resources for how to apply, when to apply, what you should do to apply. And then UQ pitches in and gives us some support for, making those exams easier, just reducing a little bit of the cost.